So in case no one has actually seen it, we recently got the new gameplay for the upcoming Call of Duty game, and apparently Call of Duty will have parkour in that game. It's gonna be like Assassin's Creed. But yes, I'm back for one final time about the new Call of Duty game, and I have promised indeed that I will be sharing my thoughts on what I would expect to see in it. So people often asked in the comments in the previous vid, will I get this game, and can you please get it and that. Okay, well, I will get it under these circumstances. Now, just let me start by saying I'm not really that much of a World War II buff anymore. I'm more of like, a hypothetical World War III buff, but there are still some World War II games that I like out there. And what determines if I will play this upcoming game will also be on the missions that will be inside this game. Like, for example, every single World War II Call of Duty game has shown the same thing. Like, everything. The Normandy landings, Stalingrad, the Battle for Berlin. Like, people, aren't you tired of playing the same missions over and over again? World War II was a conflict that lasted 6 years, and there are many, many war stories that are out there that are good and inspiring. Now, I will get the next Call of Duty game if at least one of these things is shown. The lesser-known theater of World War II is actually the North American theater, and that's something I really would like to see, and I really think should be in some, not just games, but in also a lot of movies. So let's start with the most well-known attack on North America during World War II, and that was the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, everyone virtually knows the attack on Pearl Harbor and what happened and what date. It was basically the event that formally brought the United States into World War II. And come on, this should be in a Call of Duty game. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault did a very good job at showing World War II through the scope of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and so did the game Blazing Angels. I'm perfectly confident that Call of Duty Vanguard can pull that off as well. So we've got that settled. So let's go on to the second event, which is also lesser known, and it's called the Aleutian Islands Campaign. In the early days of World War II, Japan had always had an idea of invading the United States, and one thing that they would try to implement was a sort of backdoor policy. They were looking for a backdoor into the United States. And the Aleutian Islands, which is a string of islands connected to Alaska, were basically the ones that brought up this idea. They were actually materialized shortly after the Battle of Midway. And on June 1942, the Japanese began their air raids. They first started by bombing Dutch Harbor, which is an American settlement on the Aleutian chain, and eventually, a few days later, they actually invaded and occupied the two islands of Attu and Kiska. These islands were also home to some Alaskan natives, but they were also home to a few American citizens from the state of Utah. The American government wanted to evacuate them, but the people refused. And that was a bad idea, as these people were actually taken prisoner by the Japanese, and they were sent to an internment camp in Japan. The occupation of Attu and Kiska was the first time that a foreign power had occupied U.S. soil since the Mexican-American War in the mid-19th century. The Allied response was quite rapid after the occupation began, and they were especially angry because the Aleutian Islands were lightly defended, which meant that a Japanese force of some 7,000 troops had pretty easily taken over the island. On August 1942, the U.S. military set up an airbase in Alaska, which they used for bombing raids against the now fortified positions on Attu and Kiska. There were also several naval battles in the area, in the waters surrounding the two islands. However, a full frontal assault to retake the islands didn't happen at this time, as worsening weather and the harsh winter months made any sort of invasion quite hard and costly. That actually didn't materialize until the next year. In March 1943, the U.S. Navy managed to break through at the Battle of the Kamekami Islands, and the first assault began 2 months later. On May 1942, the U.S. military actually decided to invade the island of Attu first because they wanted to cut off any kind of Japanese retreat. U.S. forces made a beach landing, and what followed was utter carnage. The Japanese forces had entrenched themselves on the island, and they refused to surrender. There was bitter machine gun fighting as well as the largest banzai charge of the entire war. The fighting in both the caves and the steep cliffs of the island were so brutal that of the 2,500 Japanese troops stationed on the island, only 26 of them actually survived. Over the course of a month, Attu was pretty much secured, and the US forces had dug in their own positions on the island. On June of 1942, the Americans launched Operation Cottage, which was also the operation meant to retake Kiska from the Japanese. This was actually one of the strangest operations of the war, as when the Allied forces landed on Kiska, they actually found the area quite desolate. And because their nerves were still shaken from the recent Battle of Attu, many expected ambush positions to be inside the caves and craters of Kiska. There were also booby traps left behind by the Japanese and instances of friendly fire under the thick fog. However, about a day after the event, it was found out that the Japanese had long since abandoned the island and escaped the North Pacific under cover of heavy fog. That's when the Aleutian Islands campaign formally ended. So now we'll go to the third event that I am most interested in, and that is the Battle of the St. Lawrence. Canada had been in the Second World War since almost the very beginning, since 1939, and was one of the biggest suppliers of necessary material for the Allies during their fight in Europe. The Battle of the Atlantic was a crucial point here because it would basically determine the fate of the Allies on the Western Front. Naturally, Hitler unleashed unrestricted submarine warfare on these convoys, and a lot of them actually decided to choke the supply lines right at the source. In the spring of 1942, U-boats began their incursion into the St. Lawrence River in Canada, where they would begin a terrorizing campaign by sinking merchant vessels and a few warships inside Canadian territorial waters. People were actually shocked to see the Second World War come to their doorstep. It was the first time that a foreign enemy had attacked Canadian soil since the Fenian raids in the 1860s. There were also attempted dropping offs of spies on Canadian territory and the picking up of POWs that had escaped from Canadian prisoners of war camps. Probably the most famous loss during the Battle of the St. Lawrence was the sinking of the SS Caribou, which was a civilian ferry that was torpedoed inside the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and 137 people, including women and children, perished in the seas. These actions lasted all throughout 1942, a little bit in 1943, and in 1944. But despite these harsh and very stealthy Nazi U-boat attacks, they pretty much failed because the Canadian Air Force and the Canadian Navy actually succeeded in harassing the U-boats' activities, protecting the convoys, and intercepting all attempted spy landings. The last events of the Battle of the St. Lawrence was at the end of the war in Europe in 1945, when two German U-boats surfaced at St. John's, Nova Scotia, and formally surrendered. Now, this would be very good to have, and we need more of this in a lot of things. So far, the only things that I have seen with the Battle of the St. Lawrence are the movie 49th Parallel and the TV show Bomb Girls. But we really need to put this in Call of Duty, and if this did show up, I would masturbate to this game. And the last event that I would like to see shown in Call of Duty is the Battle of Los Angeles. Now, many people don't know about this, but this is actually one of the most mysterious engagements of World War II itself. In the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor, people on the West Coast were on edge as they feared that a Japanese invasion would be imminent, and so all types of coastal artillery and air defenses were set up along the entire West Coast. On February 24th, 1942, U.S. Naval Intelligence sent a message to command that a Japanese invasion was imminent in the next 10 hours. This basically sent everyone on alert. That very night, unknown aircraft were spotted both through searchlights and on radar, approaching Los Angeles, the largest city in California. Air raids were actually glistened all over the city, as well as an entire blackout was shown. What followed was pure devastation. Hundreds of thousands of anti-aircraft rounds were actually shot up in the sky as some sort of flying object was visible both in real life and on radar. but they could not shoot down that very object. The so-called air raid actually lasted throughout the night, and the shooting ended at 5 a.m. the following morning, and the blackout was lifted at 7 a.m. on February 25th. 5 people died as an indirect result of the incident, either from car crashes or heart attacks, and people have actually called this the American Blitz. The next day, an investigation ensued as the media put this event on the front page all over the West Coast. One Secretary of the Navy actually called this a false alarm, but this decision had been criticized, as multiple both radar and actual people have seen aircraft fly in the skies above Los Angeles. One witness even claimed to see a sort of flying object fall to the ground after being shot, but no damage was recovered. Several buildings were also damaged due to the result of anti-aircraft fire, and there were unexploded shells over many streets all over Los Angeles. Theories and investigations actually ensued in the following days after the battle itself. Many people actually speculated that what the air defenses witnessed was a bunch of weather balloons that they mistook for Japanese aircraft. Some people actually claimed to have intelligence that Japanese submarine aircraft carriers were actually within the vicinity of the California coast. Another naval officer actually claimed that Japanese infiltrators had armed crop dusters and were willing to use them to launch bombing raids all over the city of Los Angeles. There have also been some more unusual theories, as the Battle of Los Angeles has actually been a popular topic for ufologists, claiming that aliens visited Los Angeles in the event of World War II, and everyone else thought that it may have been the Japanese. In general, the investigations were dropped as the war raged on, and they did not continue once the war ended. Some cases were reopened decades after the Second World War ended, but no conclusive evidence has been brought up to support any claim, and the Japanese has not actually released any information on what might have happened or what might not have happened that very night. What exactly happened during the Battle of Los Angeles that evening? No one will ever know. But then again, it involves great anti-aircraft fire, and I think that is something that should be featured in Call of Duty. So there you go, people. That's one thing that I'm most interested in, and I seriously hope at least one of these things will be in this upcoming Call of Duty game. Now, because time is short, and we're going to have 3 upcoming games over the last 3 months of 2021 coming out, from Far Cry 6 to, yes, Call of Duty, to even Dying Light 2. So I'm going to begin with a new game on Sunday. Catch you later.